The next section dealing with land use controls has to do with subdivision regulations. Is that a public restriction or a private restriction? Public, right? We missed that one to start with. The good thing about missing it is you won't miss it again. Subdivision regulations, subdivision ordinance. These are in fact public restrictions, and they speak to they speak to the orderly creation of subdivisions. Ooh, matter of fact, write that down. That sounded good. Subdivision regulations have to do with the orderly creation of subdivisions. We're not going to say yes. We're not going to say no. We're going to say you have to follow this process and these rules to determine whether you get a subdivision approval or not. Okay? First thing you need to do, and the first thing you need to know, is the definition of a subdivision. Listen closely to this definition of a subdivision. It's actually the first bullet point if you don't want to write it down. A division of a tract of land into 2 or more lots for the purpose of resale or development. The definition of a subdivision is a division of a tract of land into how many lots? 2 or more for the purpose of resale and development. 2 or more lots for the purpose of resale or development. The thing that I find interesting about that point is that I look at my subdivision. My subdivision is 900 homes. But actually, it doesn't have to be. The creation of a subdivision could be as little as 2 lots. Now, I'm going to say something, and I'm going to come back and tell you that this is no longer true, but it's close enough to true to say it. It is illegal to sell a lot in an unapproved subdivision. That's why it's a big deal to know whether it's a subdivision or not. It's illegal to sell a lot in an unapproved subdivision. Okay? It still probably doesn't resonate with you yet, but let me give you an example of why this is important. When I was working with the Chapel Hill office years ago, I used to run an ad, and that ad said something to the effect of, affordable housing in Chapel Hill, question mark, call Chris. I used to get a lot of calls. Do you know why I got a lot of calls? There's never been any affordable housing in Chapel Hill. So if someone called me, I would show them maybe a condo, maybe a townhouse, something I knew they weren't going to want to buy, but it got the conversation started. Then I ended up taking them out toward Pittsburgh, Hillsborough, or in this case, Mebane. Okay? Mebane hasn't always been the thriving metropolis that it is today. You know, Tanger Outlet was not there at the time all this was going on. Mebane was out in the middle of nowhere. Okay? So anyway, I'm talking to this guy one day. He can afford, his maximum buying range was $63,500. And if you want to be honest, it's more like $63,489. If he goes to $63,500, I'd probably have to lend him $11 so he could complete the transaction. But this is the top of his buying range, and we find him a house in Mebane that he actually likes. It's just a very simple house. He decided that he liked it. It was going to be perfect. So the first house that I ever sold when I was working with the Chapel Hill office, I almost went to jail. Almost went to jail. Actually, it wasn't even really that close. But it makes a better story if you started out that way. So I thought I'd get your attention on it. I could have gone to jail, so there's that. What are we talking about? What got us started? Subdivisions, and selling a lot in an unapproved subdivision is what? Illegal. Let me tell you what I was involved in. One of the things that you might think that sellers would certainly know, if someone calls you up and asks to sell a property, you probably assume that they own it. Do not assume that they own it. Sellers sometimes do not know. Now, they might be trying to lie to you, they might be crazy. Those are different issues. Sometimes they literally don't know. This seller was trying to sell me a house right there on this lot. Okay, so I've got my buyer from Chapel Hill. He's buying this house in Mebane, North Carolina. That house on that lot, it looks like it's the simplest thing ever. It's a little white house, little fence, driveway, the whole 9 yards. What the seller actually owned was a 1/3 tenancy in common in a 4.3 acre tract of land. On this land, the seller owned this property right here, Crazy sister number 1 owned that property, and, well, they lived in that property. Crazy sister number 2 lived in that property. They were tenants in common in the whole, all right? And you say, all right, I still don't see where you're going with this, Chris. Well, let me ask you this question. My buyer wants to buy that house on that lot. That house on that lot does not exist because this is not a lot. It's part of a larger tract. So then they said, well, couldn't the seller right here just simply sell their 1/3 interest in the property? Well, sure, they could sell their 1/3 interest in the property, but then you're partners with Crazy Sister 1 and Crazy Sister 2. Nobody wants that. Theoretically, remember, tenancy in common, you can't bar someone else from your property so they can just move down into here with you if they wanted to. These people are like country crazy, okay? So, I mean, this is the type of stuff that could happen. Now, you say, well, how did all this go to jail? Basically, what's happening is, if he sells that property right there, would you sell, say he sold a lot in an unapproved subdivision? This has never been divided, okay? He's trying to sell me something that literally does not exist. You say, all right, well, it looks like each of these people might be content with just dividing this up. That way each one gets their own. Couldn't they just do that? Let's try it out. Do you understand, to create a subdivision, there is a process, there are regulations. Among these regulations, which I don't think you need to go learn, but just see if they make sense to you. We're going to create a subdivision, it's going to be important to make sure that there is ingress and egress. Okay, can you get into, can you get out of the property? Okay, that's simple enough. This is Mebane Oaks Road. Mebane Oaks Road, they each have a driveway on Mebane Oaks Road. This is not a big deal. Okay, we have that one checked. How about utilities? Okay, well, no problem. Carolina Power and Lights, who it was at the time, they have light poles that serve each one of these. That's fine. They have their own driveway, they have their own light poles, everything's looking good. What have I not taken into consideration yet? Water and sewer. Water and sewer. These properties were being served by a well that was on none of the properties. I'm sure that at one point this was old family land, and this well had served a bunch of stuff. They're all being served by a well that's not even on their property any longer. And how about the septic? Septic field runs right out there onto somebody else's land. They're never going to be able to subdivide this particular property. They're not going to be able to be approved as a subdivision. So this deal obviously fell through. Now, fortunately for us as the agents, I'm the buyer agent, remember? So when I show up, when we get close to making an offer, we pull the deed on the property, and as we're looking at the deed, we realize that what they're describing is a 4.3 acre tract of land instead of a 1 acre tract of land. It became obvious to us, and plus the fact that there were 2 other names on the deed, right? So anyway, I didn't get close to being arrested because the buyer never bought the property. But that's why this law exists. Nothing wrong with selling lots on a subdivision, but it needs to go through the approval process first. Now, would you like to hear how complicated real estate is?
Yeah.
Yes, would you like to hear? Here it comes. Okay. Did you just hear me say that it is illegal to sell a lot in an unapproved subdivision? Did you just hear that?
Yes.
That's not true. Now, it might be true that you heard me say it, okay, but the law has changed. It changed back in 2006 or 2008, somewhere along there. Here's what the law now says. You can sell a lot in an unapproved subdivision if developer, you have preliminary plat approval. You know what a plat is, right? Okay, you know what preliminary means. So apparently they have a plat that's probably going to be correct. But you can sell a lot if, in a subdivision today if you have preliminary plat approval. You don't have to have the final approval yet. And rather than you memorizing this, see if this makes sense to you, and then you don't have to worry about committing it to long-term memory. You see the way that developers develop a lot today. Have you ever heard of a subdivision? A subdivision being done in phases. Okay, phase 1 is sold out. Phase 2 has not been recorded yet, but surely there's preliminary plat approval. They probably already have the roads cut in for that matter. Okay, so the way the old law worked, you could not even take an offer on phase 2. You could not take a contract, you couldn't take a reservation fee, nothing. But doesn't it make sense that the law eventually evolved to say, hey, developers, it's okay. Once you get preliminary plat approval, which means you're probably going to be approved, with, very modest changes. But once you get preliminary plat approval, start marketing those properties, start taking contracts on those properties. But at the end of the day, you still can't what without final plat approval? Close. You can't close without preliminary plat approval. So the law hasn't changed dramatically, but you can now contract on a lot in an unapproved subdivision if you have preliminary plat approval, if that preliminary plat is attached to the contract, if the buyer has certain rights of rescission in the event that there are major changes to the preliminary plat, and it must be recorded before you close. Now, I went through all that to say this. Just make sure, if you end up in a situation where you're selling with a developer in a subdivision, and this is not going to happen with any of your big developers, but think about it. Somebody in Harnett County, you might get called by someone in Harnett County one day, some farmer who has seen all his buddies making money growing houses. And so he used to grow soybeans, now he's going to start growing houses as well. So he's got a John Deere tractor and tobacco sticks. So he goes out and plows the road, puts some tobacco sticks in there and says, start selling them for me, Melissa. Show me your plat. Show me your plat. If you can show me that you have plat, at least preliminary plat approval, I will market that. Until this time, no, I'm not going to do that. There's going to be some investigation, some engineering and stuff that has to take place before you can start marketing the properties. How's the easiest way for you to determine whether a subdivision has been approved or not? Go to the Registry of Deeds, and if there's a plat recorded, I promise you. And then if it hasn't been yet recorded, but it's close, the developer should have a copy of the plat that is preliminarily approved, right? Simple enough. Oh, hey, that's what that bullet point right there says, so apparently that must be important. I'm glad I talked about it after all. Transfer of title cannot happen until it's recorded. I think I said that. Boom, good. All right, see this one right here, that 1, 2, third red star down, okay? You need to put another star beside that one. There is no way in the world that you are not being tested on complying with street disclosure laws. This has been in every update course I have taught for the last probably 5 or 6 years. It comes up in bulletins on a regular basis. In regards to subdivisions, street disclosure, so here it comes. The first purchaser of a lot in a subdivision, now when I say the first purchaser, I actually mean the first purchaser of every lot in a subdivision. In other words, the first end user. I'm not talking about when the developer sells it to the builder. I'm talking about when the builder sells it to an end user consumer. That's what I mean by the first buyer. First buyer of every lot in a subdivision must be informed as to the maintenance of the road that fronts his house. Must be informed as to the maintenance of the road that fronts the house, whether it's public or private. Frontage, the front of the house, the road that fronts it. You have to get used to the word frontage in this class. The frontage always refers to the width of a property, facing some amenity like the road or the front of the property.
I wasn't following when you said first purchaser. Do you mean like the builder?
Not the builder, but the first end user consumer. This is a consumer protection law. So the developer may sell it to a builder, but when the builder sells it to an actual buyer, there you go, first homeowner. That's a good way of saying it that way. Yeah. Okay, so buyer, you have to be informed, is the road in front of your house public or is it private? Now, this is interesting. Either is okay. Either is okay. Let's deal with private to start with. Buyer, if you were told that the road in front of your house was going to be a privately maintained road, what would be great follow-up questions for you to ask? Okay, who's going to take care of it? All right, what if I told you this? The developer will take care of that road for you. What do you say about that?
Well, when you're done,
That's great, as long as the developer's there. But the developer doesn't plan on staying there forever. Okay? So how about when the developer leaves? Who's going to take care of the road then? What do you hope the answer is? The homeowners association. You hope that the answer is the homeowners association. However, that brings up another question. If the HOA is taking care of it, is anybody collecting funds? I talked to a woman in a subdivision that had an HOA, but it was kind of loosely formed, and they had never collected any fees. And when the road started deteriorating, there was no money to take care of the roads. So I asked her, I said, well, what did you think will happen? You knew it was a private road. You knew they weren't collecting any money. Did you think at some point in time, the private road ferry was going to come down and take care of this road? That clearly is not going to be the case. So ask the questions. Agent, the buyers don't always know the questions to ask. Who's going to take care of it? Developer, well, they're going to leave at some point. The HOA, do they have any money? Okay, let's talk about whether they are solvent. And then if it's not the HOA, if it's not the developer, who's left? You're taking care of it. I hope you can go out and buy some saccharin and pour it in a hole when it starts running out, because that's the way it's going to be taken care of. Okay? But you know what? That's fair. As long as you buyer are aware and you're comfortable with that, private road is fair. Actually, in some cases, people prefer private roads. Do you know what the great thing about a private road is? Control. You can control. You can control the way people park on it or not park on it. You can control whether people can cross over it, right? There are some good things about a private road. But having said that, we're talking about maintenance. That's what we're talking about, maintenance. Who's going to maintain it? So then, here comes the important part. The roads could be public as well. But here's one of the things that's going on in regards to public roads. Think about this. At the time that the developer creates the subdivision, is DOT going to come over and take over the road on day one? Now, there's not enough houses there to make it worth the time of the Department of Transportation to allocate resources to come to the subdivision to take care of a road for one person. So what happens is the developer will continue, even though the developer offers the road for dedication. When they do their plat, they say that these roads are going to be publicly maintained roads. What they're doing is they're offering the roads for public dedication. A review officer with the Department of Transportation will look at it and say, that looks good. If it's built to certain specs, have you ever noticed DOT roads have to be built to certain specs? I don't expect you to know what those specs are, but you recognize them oftentimes when you see them. Okay? So anyway, DOT looks at it and says, yeah, we're going to take these roads over. Subject to inspection though, right? So here's what happened. Buyer, you were just told when you bought this house that the roads were going to be public, but they're not yet. During the interim, who's likely to take care of those roads while the builder and developer are developing the property? Who's likely to take care of the roads? Probably the developer. Probably the developer. They'll take care of them. And you've been on these roads before. Matter of fact, you may live on one of these roads right now. Have you ever been into a subdivision before and you see that the road is actually about this far below the curbing? Sometimes the manhole covers have not been completed yet. That road is not finished yet. They have not put the final lift, the final layer of asphalt on the road. I promise you, if you see a road in that condition, DOT has not taken that road over yet. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying they're still in the process of the developer hasn't turned it over to DOT yet. The logic behind this is there's no sense in putting a perfect road there as long as you have big construction trucks driving across this road. After they're gone, then we'll top this off. Okay? So anyway, here's what I want you to know. Just because the developer says that they're public roads, the developer made an offer of public dedication, DOT is not going to accept those roads until some later point in time once they have passed a final inspection. Does that make sense so far? Okay? You with me, Ben? Okay. Now let's talk about why this is a problem. 2008. This law has actually been around since the late 70s, but since 2008 I have heard this come up more than I've ever heard it before. 2008, what happened with the economy, especially in regards to home building? Crashed. It crashed. Even though our area was not as horrible as some places in the country, we got hit pretty bad. Okay? There are a lot of developers that never turned their streets over to DOT because the developer did what? They go bankrupt before they ever are able to turn these roads over to DOT. So here's my buyer. Remember what she was told a couple of years earlier? These will be publicly maintained roads. DOT never accepted these roads. Developer is gone. For all intents and purposes, she lives on what type of street? It's basically a privately maintained street. The DOT never took those roads over. I'm saying DOT, it could be the city if you're in the city limits, but if no one ever took them over, then you basically are living on a private street. This has come up several times over the last several years, where buyers, now homeowners, are out there and they're looking at the road deteriorating and they say, hey, why isn't somebody coming to take care of our streets? Well, the answer is because there is no one. They were never accepted by DOT. HOA is not going to take care of it because they never had planned on taking care of the roads, so they don't have money set aside to take care of the roads. Here's some good news for you. Eventually, if they were supposed to be public roads, there's a decent chance that DOT may step in and make this right. However, they're not going to do it for free, are they? What do you think is getting ready to happen to these people if DOT comes in, finishes off the roads, and takes them over? They're going to get with one special assessment. They're going to get hit with a special assessment on that road, on those roads. How would you feel if after living on these roads, you ended up being hit with an assessment of $1,100? I'm mad. I'm not litigious. At $1,100, what if it were $5,000? What if it were $10,000? The highest one I've heard so far has been in the neighborhood of $18,000 to $20,000 per lot to have these roads. Now, I want you to understand what we're saying. You were told that these were public roads, not like you set aside $18,000 in the event that you had to pay an assessment on this, right? You thought you'd been paying for these roads already. You thought that your tax monies were paying for the future maintenance of these roads, and now you get hit with an $18,000 assessment per lot to take care of those roads. Now, are you litigious at this point? I'm looking for somebody. I'm looking for somebody. So now let's bring it back to real estate agents. If you're ever selling a new home, you need to be cognizant of this law. You need to know that this law exists and make sure that the buyers are well aware. There is a process for this. This is one of those cases, though. Normally, in this class, you'll hear me say, there's a form for this. There's not a form for this. The developer or someone needs to make a form for this purpose. But basically, here's what it says. Hey, buyer, these roads are either private or public. I'm checking public. However, DOT has not taken these roads over yet. You need to be aware of that. Now, a buyer, if they choose to, they can investigate the developer and determine, is that developer strong enough that I believe they're going to finish this subdivision? Most cases, the answer is going to be yes. All right. If you're really worried about a buyer, you could go do an investigation and see if they had put up some money in a bond, which is what should have happened in many of these other cases, and it just fell through the cracks. So in other words, I'm not telling you, real estate agent, to fix this problem. What I'm saying is, real estate agent, make sure your buyer is aware. Is it private? That's okay. It has its own set of questions, but that's okay. Is it public? That's okay. But if it hasn't been accepted by DOT yet, technically, it will be public in the future, but right now, it's still privately maintained. You better make sure that the developer has the wherewithal to pull this thing off. Most of the time they will. It's an awareness type issue. But I promise you, it's a test issue. Okay? Yes, sir.
Can you clarify the part where you said money should have been put into a bond?
There's a process when they develop the subdivision. They're supposed to set aside bonds in the event that something happens where they're not able to finish the roads that will be used to complete the road construction. In some cases, in some cases, that process has fallen through and the money was not there when needed. Yeah.
Is the bond public? If you're a prospective home buyer, how do you know to actually fund it bond?
Oh, you can research the developer, or you can talk with the county. I've never done that type of process. I know of one case right now where a developer is being sued for exactly this. Interesting thing about the one that's being sued right now, the developer himself is solvent, which is good because they have a reason to believe that they're going to get some money from that. Having said that, I don't know what the process is for checking all this out, but it is all public information. So yeah, you would be able to do it. I don't know of any buyer who has ever done that. I don't know of any agent at this point who has been, that's not true. I know 2 agents who have been disciplined for this, but I don't know if there's been any civil action against agents on this, because the civil action is typically going to be against them, typically the developer. Okay. Yeah.
Does the entire subdivision need to be complete before they can turn over roads or phases?
No, there was an interesting case over in Durham where, because it was developed in phases, phase 1 was completed and accepted by DOT. Phase 2 was not, all right? And phase 2 is when the economy went down. So the roads in phase 2 were never completed. Phase 1 was. It's going to cost $10,000 per lot to complete phase 2. That's what their assessment is going to be. And the people in phase 1 are going, oh man, I'm sorry for you guys, glad that wasn't us. Somehow they managed to shift through the homeowners association, they shifted the burden so that instead of these guys paying $10,000 per lot, it was spread to $5,000 per lot for everyone, including the people in the front. Where the,
So it doesn't have whole subdivision?
it doesn't have to be. And oftentimes you'll drive through one part of the subdivision, the roads are complete. And then you go, boom, boom,
Yeah.
and when you get into the next part of the subdivision. Yeah. Subdivision street disclosures. Do you know what I want you to know? Private, okay. Public, okay. But just because I offered it for dedication, does that mean that DOT has to accept it? No, it doesn't mean they have accepted. And what I mean, do they have to accept it? Trust me, when you turn over DOT, it has to go through an inspection process. If it doesn't pass that inspection, they're not going to accept it until it does pass that inspection process. Okay, subdivision street disclosures. I've got a tough one on my midterm, so you'll get a chance to see what a really hard question about that looks like. Okay, you're not ready for the midterm yet. You won't get it for another week and a half. And then finally, talking about subdivisions, protective covenants are enforceable. Protective covenants are what you probably refer to as restrictive covenants. And even though we're talking about subdivision regulations right here, we're throwing it out there. Don't forget, not only do you have the subdivision regulations to deal with, but in these subdivisions, oftentimes there are going to be covenants, and they are going to be recorded. And if they're recorded, they're going to be enforceable. Stay tuned for the rest of the chapter, because this comes up right at the end of chapter 6. Okay? All right, now that the heaviness is over, let's knock out a couple of things real quickly. Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. I don't know if you're getting there yet, but by the 3rd or 4th week, you're going to say, holy cow, my brain is full of all this information. If you're already full of this information, I got bad news for you. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets any better. Sometimes you have to pick your poison and decide how and what you're going to study. I would encourage you to get really, really good at reading the name of an act. If you can read the name of an act and it tells you 75 or 80% of what you need to know, you've won. For example, look at the name of this act. The Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. Interstate means across what? State lines. What are you selling across state lines? Land. What if it has a house on it? Does it fall under the auspices of this law? No, because then it wouldn't be called a land sale act. This is if you're selling vacant land across state lines. And apparently, if I'm going to sell vacant land across state lines, there's something I need to tell you. Full disclosure, right? Let me tell you the history of this act. I'm going to tell it to you just really, really quickly, because this is not the testable part of it. This basically goes back to the idea, now think about it, it's interstate, and it's a law, and it deals with residential properties. So this is what I mean by reading the name of an act. If it involves land that's going to be used for residential purposes and it cross state lines, what's the oversight of that going to be? It has to be federal. If it crosses state lines, it has to be federal, right? And then what department of the federal government oversees residential properties? Would be HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and now it actually falls under what we call Consumer Financial Protection. You're protecting consumers, okay? So let me tell you the history of this act. Don't worry too much about it, but it may help you understand the act a little bit better. Back in the, when did this act pass? Was it the late 50s, early 60s, somewhere along in there? It's not important, it's not a history exam, okay? But it's, you know, it's a couple of generations old at this point. And it speaks to the idea that of these land sales. Now picture this, if you could. You live in Buffalo, New York. And in Buffalo, New York, it's 18 degrees below zero. There's 48 feet of snow, and you're freezing. One day you walk out to you shovel out to your mailbox, and you check the mail. And in your mail, there's this color brochure, a beautiful color brochure. And it's a picture. And it's a picture of ocean waves and birds flying and palm trees and cabanas. And it says, buy your retirement home near Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Okay? You're in Buffalo, and you get this, and you're a year or two out from retiring. So you go back in, you warm up, you look at it, and you get on the phone, and you call and say, I need to reserve my lot right now. What do I have to do? And of course, when you do that, you've reached someone that's in boiler room sales. These people are closers. Have you ever seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross? If you ever seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, this is exactly what they were doing in there. They're in a boiler room. They're calling leads. They are closers. Okay? If you go out and watch Glengarry Glen Ross tonight, by the way, if you ever take any of my movie suggestions, make sure that you do not watch them with the kids in the room. I haven't had a kid for that long, and so I used to be able to watch. Glengarry Glen Ross got some tough language in it, doesn't it? And it's constant, so just say I warned you on that. But anyway, what they're doing is they're selling lots in these two subdivisions down in Florida, Glengarry and Glen Ross, and it's high pressure sales. So you're in Buffalo. You call up, you want to reserve your lot near Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and they say, well, you need to send some money down, $5,000, we'll hold the lot for you. And there are very few options remaining, so you need to send it down now. You run into your living room, you grab your checkbook, you write a check, you mail it out, you now have your lot reserved. You fill out all the paperwork. Here's what you plan on doing. During the summer thaw in Buffalo, you're going to ride down and look at your new property near Myrtle Beach and take a look at the setup. When you get down there, here's what you discover. When it said it was near Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, what it meant was it just has to be in the same state as Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. There's no beach nearby. Those pictures of the waves, you know, they photoshopped about in 1958, they did. But they drew them in there, okay? That cabana was just a Barbie dream home shot up close. The palm trees were those plastic things you buy for kids' birthday parties. You have been scammed. Do you want your $5,000 back? I bet you do. You're not going to get it. Oh, but by the way, I tell you what, if you'll just walk away right now, we won't sue you for specific performance to make you buy this particular property. If you'll just leave right now, we won't sue you. Wow, that went different than what I expected. I expected to leave here happy, and now I'm sad. This is a scam, okay? And they were selling and they were marketing all over the country. Who were they targeting? Retirees. Older people. Matter of fact, let me give you some advice. If you ever decide that you're going to run a scam, don't run a scam against old people. First of all, they have a very large political action committee. Today it would be somebody like AARP. But secondly, you're probably going to go to hell because scamming old people is bad. But anyway, they also don't mind picking up the phone and calling their elected officials. And so that's what happened. And so enough pressure was put on Congress, they eventually passed an act, the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. I'm not saying you can't sell land across state lines today, but if you're going to do it, you need to be fair. When I say near Myrtle Beach, how close